Hello, everyone. The gender binary, the idea that only two genders exist, fixed and opposite, is often treated as ancient, universal, and natural. But history tells a different story. Across the world, long before European conquest, societies recognized multiple genders, fluid identities, and diverse roles that did not fit neatly into man or woman. The rigid binary that dominates modern Western culture is not a timeless truth. It is colonial invention, engineered to reshape societies, control bodies, and enforce a racialized hierarchy of power. Across continents, pre-colonial societies held complex, nuanced understandings of gender. These systems were not identical, but they shared a common truth: gender was not binary. Many nations recognized two-spirit people, individuals who embodied both masculine and feminine roles, or who occupied unique spiritual and social positions. Two-spirit identities were not marginal. They were respected, sometimes revered, and often held ceremonial or leadership roles. In Africa, numerous African societies acknowledged gender diversity. The Langi of Uganda recognized Mudokodako, effeminate males who lived as women. The Yoruba did not organize society around a strict male-female binary. Gender categories were fluid and contextual. The Dahomey Kingdom had women warriors in gender nonconforming roles that defied European expectations. Asia, South Asia, has long recognized hijras, a third gender community with spiritual and cultural significance. In parts of Southeast Asia, gender categories were expansive, with roles for gender variant shamans, healers, and leaders. The specific: Hawaii's Mahu, Samoa's Afafine, Tonga's Fakalaiti, and Fiji's Wakasalawalewa represents long-standing gender identities that predate European contact by centuries. Latin America, many indigenous nations had gender-diverse roles, including the Zapotec and various gender-variant spiritual leaders across the Andes and the Amazon. The world was not binary. The binary was imposed. European colonial powers did not simply encounter gender diversity, they targeted it. The gender binary was a tool of empire used to restructure societies in ways that benefited colonial control. 1. Controlling labor and reproduction. Colonizers needed men to work in mines, plantations, and military forces, women to produce children who would become laborers or settlers. A rigid binary made it easier to assign people to roles that served the colonial economy. 2. Enforcing Christian morality. European Christianity viewed gender and sexuality through a strict moral lens. Only two genders, only heterosexual marriage, only procreative sex, only patriarchal family structures. Gender-diverse people were labeled sinful, demonic, or against nature. 3. Establishing racial hierarchy. Colonizers used gender norms to define civilization. Europeans equaled rational, disciplined, properly gendered, and indigenous peoples equaled chaotic, immoral, and sexually deviant. This justified conquest. If indigenous societies did not conform to European gender norms, colonizers claimed that they were unfit to govern themselves. 4. Destroying indigenous governance. Many gender-diverse people held spiritual authority, diplomatic roles, healing responsibilities, and cultural knowledge. Eliminating them weakened indigenous governance and resistance. The gender binary was not just a belief, it was a weapon. Colonizers did not rely on persuasion, they used law, force, and punishment. The British imposed anti-cross-dressing laws, anti-sodomy laws under Section 377, vagrancy laws targeting gender nonconforming people, and criminal tribes acts that labeled Hijras as criminals by birth. These laws spread across India, Africa, and the Caribbean and beyond. In Spanish and Portuguese empires, the Catholic doctrine fueled violent persecution. Gender diverse people were tortured or executed by colonial authorities. Indigenous gender roles were labeled adultery. Missionaries destroyed cultural practices tied to gender diversity. French and Dutch empires. Colonial administrators enforced European gender norms through schooling, missionary work, legal codes, and policing of dress and behavior. Across empires, gender diversity became a target of civilizing missions. Colonialism did not just criminalize gender diversity, it erased it. Through 1. Destroying records, missionaries burned oral histories, ceremonial objects, clothing associated with gender diverse roles, and spiritual texts. 2. Rewriting anthropology. Early anthropologists misinterpreted indigenous gender systems, labeled them deviant, primitive, or perverse, erased gender diverse people from ethnographies, recast indigenous societies as heterosexual and binary, replacing indigenous education. The colonial schools taught binary gender roles, patriarchal family structures, Christian morality, and shame around gender diversity. 4. Internalizing colonial norms. Over generations, colonized societies began to see gender diversity as un-African, un-Asian, un-indigenous, Western, even though the opposite is true. Many countries that criminalize LGBTQ plus people today do so under colonial laws still on the books. Even where laws have changed, colonial gender norms persist in schools, religious institutions, family structures, media, politics. Transphobia and queerphobia often masquerade as tradition, but they are colonial inheritance, not ancestral truths. Across the world, indigenous and queer communities are reclaiming gender diversity as part of decolonization. They do this through 1. Reviving traditional identities. Movements are restoring two-spirit roles, Hijra rights, Mahu cultural recognition, Afafina leadership, and Muse visibility. 2. Repelling colonial laws. Countries across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean are overturning colonial-era anti-LGBTQ plus laws, explicitly naming their imperial origins. And 3. Reclaiming language. Communities are reviving indigenous gender terms, non-binary pronouns, pre-colonial cosmologies of gender. 4. Challenging Western LGBTQ plus frameworks. Decolonial activists argue that Western categories such as gay, trans, and non-binary don't always fit indigenous identities. Liberation must include land, culture, and sovereignty. Queerness cannot be separated from anti-colonial struggle. 5. Healing through culture. Ceremony, storytelling, and ancestral knowledge are becoming tools of healing, resistance, reclamation, and community rebuilding. The gender binary is not natural, universal, or ancient. It is a colonial technology designed to control bodies, labor, reproduction, and identity. It was imposed through violence, law, religion, and erasure. It is a legacy that continues to shape the world. But the binary is not inevitable. Across the globe, Indigenous and queer communities are reclaiming ancestral gender systems, challenging colonial laws, and imagining futures where gender is expansive, fluid, and rooted in cultural sovereignty. To dismantle queerphobia and transphobia, we must dismantle the colonial structures that created them. To reclaim gender diversity, we must reclaim history. To build liberated futures, we must honor the truths that the empire tried to erase.